Welcome to the new Keynesian model. We last left off with empirical tests of the real business cycle model, and we saw that it didn't really hold up all that well when it came to nominal demand side shocks. It did extremely well at explaining supply side shocks. So, technology shocks and labor supply shocks did pretty well with that model. However, when it came to anything that would trigger an aggregate demand shock, the model didn't really hold up all that well. Well, at least in the short to medium run, because remember, in the long run, we did see that there was monetary neutrality. So while the empirical evidence may not be there to support the RBC model in the short to medium run, it definitely works fairly well in the long run. So that sort of left economists with the big question of, okay, we've got some decent stuff for like the medium to long run ish, but we really need some stuff for the short to medium run. And the RBC model wasn't cutting it. So that's where the new Keynesian model came. And the new Keynesian model builds on the RBC model, but it adds a couple of key components to it that not only make it a distinct model, sort of, as we'll see a little bit later on in this lecture, it also makes it allows for nominal demand side shocks, such as monetary policy shocks, such as anything originating in the expenditure function, being it, a shock to consumption that shifts aggregate demand, or a government spending shock, anything like that. It allows for certain equilibria to not always be the most efficient equilibria that we could possibly have. It allows for involuntary unemployment, because in the RBC model, a big problem was there was no source of involuntary unemployment. It was only voluntary unemployment. Essentially, the wage rate was not high enough to induce workers to want to go to work. Therefore, if it didn't satisfy the reserve wage, no one went to work. So yeah, we kind of improved on the model quite a bit. And in my own personal and humble opinion, this is definitely the best part of the class. This is the most interesting business cycle model that we'll talk about, and it really sums up everything that we have done so far for the course. It's going to tie in everything else that we've learned, and it's going to add a couple of new little components in here to really kind of tell a complete and hopefully more interesting story in how we can model the business cycle and how monetary policy can be used to affect the business cycle. So, as I had said, the point of this model was to add where the RBC model was kind of falling behind. It had some issues in explaining demand shocks. Monetary policy shocks didn't do too well. So, we had to find out if there was a way to improve upon it, but still keeping those super important micro foundations. And this is where the model gets so awesome, it's going to make you want to slap your mom. In hindsight, don't slap your mom. Uh, Public service announcement. This is not recommended. I do not support it. I vote no on it every single time. Don't hit your mom. Don't slap your mama. So let's talk about some of the assumptions of the model here, because it takes some assumptions from the RBC model, but some don't apply here, and there are additional assumptions on top of that. Remember, in the RBC model, markets were perfectly competitive. So price was equal to marginal cost every single period. Any firm that wanted to price above marginal cost just immediately got priced out of the market. So there was really no room whatsoever for the firm to gain any sort of economic profit. Therefore, both welfare theorems applied. Here they don't. So instead, we have monopolistic competition, meaning firms have pricing power. So firms do price above marginal cost. In the real business cycle model, prices were flexible. Here, they're sticky. These two things, the monopolistic competition and sticky prices, are the two big things that really separate the new Keynesian model from the real business cycle model, and it's what allows the new Keynesian model to develop some predictions and some implications for policy that the RBC model fell short in. So you're probably going like, what are sticky prices? Well, yeah, I'm kind of glad you asked. When prices can't all just well, this is actually a I can't even look at this and not laugh. It's an important this is an important public service announcement. Figure out what you need to do to clean your shoes. No, it's not that kind of sticky, although that is kind of sticky. Otherwise, it wouldn't be stuck to your shoes. Yeah, we're just going to stay away from that. But seriously, wash your shoes and your hands before trying to brush your teeth. No, when prices are sticky, they're slow to adjust. So in the RBC model, prices were 100% flexible. So any shock there was just boom, prices moved immediately. Here, when there's a shock, not all the prices get to move immediately after the shock. Some take a little time to respond. Some prices can respond immediately, others can't. And we'll talk about what some of that is as far as like examples a little bit later on. But this is what's known as a nominal rigidity in macroeconomics. And this rigidity, it's a rigid rigidity that makes nominal rigidities rigid. It means basically something can't move on the nominal side of the economy. So, well, price is a nominal variable. Therefore, if the price is rigid, it is a nominal rigidity. So, before I dig myself into a grave on really bad jokes about stepping in, sticky things, let's just get started with the model. So the model's an infinite horizon stochastic process, meaning I'm going to show you the setup and you don't have to do any calculus. So the math won't matter much for this section. It will matter a little bit. You'll have to know what some of these equations are. You'll have to play with them a little, kind of like on that homework that you saw with the RBC model. But you're not going to have to do any dynamic programming, any calculus, anything like that. But it's still important to kind of walk you guys through the setup so you can see what's going on. Think of it like, you're about to drive a new car and someone pops the hood and goes, oh, hey, here's all the cool stuff under the car. That's kind of what I'm going to do here. I'm popping the hood and letting you take a look inside. Now, the baseline new Keynesian model doesn't include capital. And that's because the predictions of the model are the same either way. Therefore, if we get the same policy implications from this model without putting capital in there, well, it's just a little bit easier to leave it out because, well, we don't need it, and it's just going to be a bunch of extra equations that, well, not too worried about it. Now, there are new Keynesian models that have capital. This is the baseline model. So this is like the new Keynesian model that all other dynamic, stochastic, general equilibrium new Keynesian models build off of. They take this and they add stuff to it. And a lot of those models, actually most of those models, do have capital, and it works for them. But the thing is, not all new Keynesian models are meant to answer the same questions. Every time we have a slightly different question, well, a new model may be required. And that's why there are so many new Keynesian DSGE models out there. Well, that, and also people want to publish and get tenure and keep their tenure. So the final good that's produced, remember in the RBC model, there was that final good that was just like in the aggregate production function. Here, the final good's a composite good that's derived from a continuum of possible goods. So I'm going to skip a lot of the derivation on this. There's really no point in doing it. You're not going to have to know how to do it. So let me just explain really quickly what I mean by a good that's derived from a continuum of possible goods. Let's think of GDP as a final composite good. Well, is there just one thing that goes into GDP? No, there's a bunch of goods that are being produced. There's a bunch of services that are being produced and provided that go into GDP. So GDP is like, it's a composite measure of all goods and services produced in this country at a certain point in time. And that's it. So think of that as the final composite good in the new Keynesian model. Now, monetary policy has a role for setting the nominal interest rate. It's something other than just zero. And there's a transmission mechanism of monetary policy such that monetary neutrality and monetary superneutrality break down in the short run, but they don't break down in the long run. The fact that there is a way for monetary policy to transmit from the nominal economy, right, from nominal from changes in nominal variables to the real economy, thus affecting real variables, breaks down that whole monetary neutrality and super neutrality thing. But in the long run, right, everything adjusts, therefore they can affect things short to medium run, but in the long run, everything kind of converges back to where it was. This is something that's known as the neoclassical synthesis, and it's a, pretty important topic to think about in macroeconomics, namely business cycle macro. So, onward, valiant steed. Cute little cat. Black cats are so cool. I got 2 of them. They're amazing. Anyway, so this is the utility function. You're probably going like, what the heck is going on here? Well, it looks weird and it looks different from what you saw in the RBC model, but it's still just composed of consumption, which is that CT. There's labor. Well, actually, technically it's leisure, but we've already kind of substituted that 1 minus LT thing in there, so we do have labor in there. And we also have money. So consumption, labor, or leisure, and money comprise the utility function. The functional form looks a little different, but the inputs are the same. Now, the household's got 2 stages here instead of just 1 stage like what we had in the RBC model. Because there's a continuum of goods, there isn't just one aggregate good that's produced like in the RBC model. We've got a bunch of little goods that are produced that all kind of add up to this final good. Now, because all of these goods exist in a continuum, we're integrating across that interval in which the continuum exists. Now, you could theoretically integrate it from 0 to anything that you wanted, but we can normalize that difference between just 0 and 1 because, there's an infinite number of points in between 0 and 1. So we can just kind of cram it all into that interval there and be totally fine with it. So what we're doing is, right, because for those of you that have had Calculus 1 and 2 where you dealt with integration, the point of the integral is to sum up what is in that interval over which you are integrating. So if, the discrete analog of this is the summation, right? You want to sum, 10 numbers that you have, right? It would just be the, little sigma summation thing, and you just add those 10 numbers up. With the integral in calculus, you're doing that, but it's over a continuous interval. It's not a discrete interval that you're summing over. So it's the same idea, just the continuous analog of it rather than just being discrete. And we're integrating all of these consumer goods, these little tiny consumer goods that people are buying. We're integrating all of that up to a final composite good. So that's what is going on here. I know it looks a little strange, but the intuition is that we are summing up all of the individual goods that are being made. We'll call it good J. We're summing it across all J's, integrating out that J, and then we now have our final consumer good. So don't feel like Professor Snape here. I think you'll be okay. So yeah, you don't need to know that thing in terms of like, I gotta spit that out on an exam. No, you're fine. To be totally honest with you, I don't even know it. So I could be like, what's the point? But essentially, since there's more than one good, we need to be able to have demand for each good. Now, integrating that thing out gives us a demand curve for each good. And the demand curve is this right here. So we've got the demand for consumer good J being equal to the price of good J divided by the aggregate price level raised to that negative epsilon times CT. CT is like the all final consumer goods. So what we have here is a relative price, the price of good J relative to all other prices. That's what that PJT over PT is. PJT is the price of good J. PT is all prices. So it's the relative price, and that negative epsilon, that epsilon is the elasticity of demand. Right? It's the price elasticity of demand. the larger that thing gets, the larger epsilon gets, the more the more firms are going to be losing their pricing power. So it's a measure really of how competitive the markets are for each good. Now, getting away from this into something that's slightly less awful, we've got the household's budget constraint, right? So the household has money, bonds, they choose how much they want to work, and, well, there's some other stuff that we'll get into. Well, there's that giant pie. God, a giant pie would be delicious right now. I actually have a blueberry pie in the kitchen. In case anyone's wondering why, I haven't really lost any weight yet this year, things like blueberry pie are definitely one of the reasons. That pie is profits from the firm. So, firm generates profits. Well, the firm is made of households. So, if the firm makes profits, the household get profits. So, we get that. Now, we convert the nominal budget constraint, which is in black, to the real budget constraint, which is in pink. And keeping with our tradition of this dynamic programming stuff that I totally haven't taught you guys, we update the budget constraint one period. We get this. We make a Bellman equation, which is this. I know it's like crazy long stuff. Yep. I'm kind of starting to side with Snape on this one now. Again, you don't need to know how to do the dynamic optimization. From all that, we get these three derivatives. Equation 7 is the Euler equation that's going to give us the factor price of bonds. Equation 8, that is giving us an Euler equation for money. It can sort of become like a money demand. And then equation 9, that's giving us labor supply. So basically, I've got something that is explaining here, right, how I want to consume or save. Now, because there's no capital, I'm not investing in capital anymore, so I'm buying bonds. These bonds can be government bonds, they can be private bonds, but I'm buying bonds to go into a firm or the government. And depending on what the real interest rate is, I'll decide how much I want to consume or save. Got something for money here. So this and this can help us get like an aggregate demand curve from these two guys here. And then this is giving me a labor supply curve. How much households want to work based on, well, the elasticity between consumption and leisure, and real wage rate, preferences over how much they want to work, etc. So these three equations here help us out quite a bit on the household side. Now, firms also face two stages here, right? So for households, the first stage was that continuum of consumer goods that they want, because we're trying to maximize consumption, capital C sub T, right? But CT is a composite of all these tinier goods, CJT. So if everything is in that CJT across all these J's, we're not maximizing that, we're maximizing CT. So we had to integrate out that J to get our final consumer good. So the consumption that you see here is consumption across that entire continuum of goods. So after step 1, where we integrated all of those final consumer goods, all those tiny consumer goods into one final consumer good, then we do our maximization the way we did with the RBC model, and we do that with the final consumer good, and then we get this stuff. So stage 1, stage 2. For firms, there are also 2 stages, because here we have intermediate goods, right? Intermediate goods are like when steel manufacturers are forging steel sheets that get sold to car manufacturers to make car stuff, right? There's an intermediate good in between when something is extracted as a raw resource and then it's actually finished into a final good. So these intermediate goods get produced, and as a result, they get sold to the final goods producers, who actually make a final good, hence their name. Now, the firm has a profit function, right? And the profit in real terms is this. So you're kind of going like, all right, what the hell is this? Well, it's a profit for firm J, and I've got that relative price, PJT over PT, times YJT. So YJT is production for firm J multiplied by its price, P sub J, right? So price times output is total revenue. And we don't have capital in this model, right? So I've got wages times the amount of labor that we use is our total cost. So I got total revenue minus total cost equals profit. This profit is for firm J. Now, we can simplify this stuff by taking that capital WT over PT, which is the nominal wage divided by the price level. Well, divide it out by the price level, we get the real wage, and that gives me this right here. It's just a little bit easier and nicer to look at. So we did some math, first order conditions, and define real marginal cost as phi sub t, right? Or that capital phi t over PT. Substitute into the equation, boom, boom, boom. Now, here's the interesting stuff. All right, the math to me is interesting, but here's the stuff that might be a little bit more interesting to you. Firms can't freely change their prices every period. So every period, there's a fixed probability omega, right? That fancy looking W. It's not a W, it is an omega. There's that probability that firms can't adjust their prices. So in the first period, the probability a firm's going to be stuck with the price that they had before is omega. So if, say, omega is 0.05, that means every period there's a 5% chance, if you are a firm, you can't change your price that period. And that means 5% of firms every single period can't change their prices. The model treats it as if it's like a random draw. And the model also treats this parameter as constant over time. In the real world, we know neither of those assumptions are true. However, it's what's known as a simplifying assumption because we're basically taking something that doesn't necessarily wildly affect the results. Therefore, it kind of just gives us like, well, if it's not really going to change anything, all right, cool, simplify it down to this. We're going to get the same thing anyways. A simplifying assumption is basically an assumption you make so that you don't have to do as much math. Even people that love doing math still don't want to do any more math than they have to. Now, in the second period, the probability the firm's going to be stuck with that same price is omega squared. So, okay, if omega is 0.5, right? First period, the probability that you can't change your price is 0.05, right? 5%. And the second period, right, 0.05 squared, well, it's 0.025. It's smaller, right? 0.025 is much smaller than 0.05, right? It's half the size. So as we go further and further in time, right, we raise that omega to an additional power, right? So in the first period, it's just omega to the first power. In the second period, it's omega to the second power. Third period, take a wild guess. Did you guess it was omega cubed? If you did, you were correct. And as we raise that power, right, that probability is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until it eventually goes to zero. As it approaches zero, as it converges to zero, what we get is prices are now fully flexible. Right, so for every period n after today, the probability the firm can't change their price is just omega to the n. Now, as time goes by, right, omega is positive but less than 1. The chance the firm is stuck with the same price as before gets lower and lower and lower, but it is still positive. So the firm's got to think ahead on this, right? If you're a firm and there's a 5% chance at every period you can't change your prices, and there's always a possibility of some kind of a shock hitting the economy, right? There's always the possibility that, something weird happens and the Fed wants to cut interest rates. Well, it's going to drive a demand shock. And if you can't always change your prices, we don't have a vertical aggregate supply curve anymore. We now have an upward sloping aggregate supply curve. Therefore, if there's a demand shock with an upward sloping aggregate supply curve, you got to make more stuff. But you don't really want to if you could just change the price, right? But you can't always change your price. So sometimes you do have to make more stuff. And thus, this pricing problem becomes dynamic because you have to think ahead. You have to go, okay, I can't change my price with, probability of 0.05. Therefore, I kind of need to price that in a little bit in my forward projections for the economy because I can set my price today, but I may not be able to set it tomorrow or the next day or the next day. Now, the probability of never being able to change it is 0, but in between now and, well, forever, there is some positive probability. So you need to be kind of concerned about that. You need to think about it. So you're thinking ahead. How am I going to set my price today given the chance that there is going to be some kind of a shock that drives demand that essentially I can't respond with price as a rationing mechanism to? I've got to set my price now in advance, right? It's like those doomsday preppers, like buying all the stuff to prep. Well, probability that it's going to happen is pretty much 0, but it's not entirely 0. So, okay, if you want to do some doomsday prepping, cool, be my guest. It could happen. It's the same kind of idea here. So they set their price based on what they expect it to be over the next couple periods. So if they go, all right, well, I can't change my price next period or the period after, but the one after that I can. So I've got to set my price for something that's going to basically make sure that I break even over that time horizon. So I'm going to set my price a little above marginal cost today. Therefore, with the hopes that if there is a shock, my price can't respond, but the marginal cost will, right? Because the more you produce, your marginal cost will change. Therefore, price might be above marginal cost today, but it could be below it tomorrow. Therefore, if I set my price today that's above marginal cost, I can kind of make up today with some extra earnings, right? Some extra profit that will cover my losses tomorrow. So the discounted present value of profits for the firm is this right here. And this discounted present value of the profits is what's determining the price for that firm at that point in time. That PT star. I think it should have been P sub JT star. My mistake. So, yeah, poor Snape. The J subscript's been taken out for marginal cost, which is the ratio of wages to technology parameter. Both are common across all firms. So we look at this, and essentially, even though this is for different firms, everything is considered to be the same for firms, right? So all these different parameters in here are considered to be identical across firms. Therefore, you don't have to worry about the J subscript. So the marginal cost has to be the same for all firms. So all firms that are able to change their price today are going to choose the same price, which is denoted as PT star, or the optimal, what's known as reset price. This is a process that's known as Calvo Pricing. Now, the relationship tells us that the optimal reset price is a markup over expected future marginal cost. If there's something that you really need to know about this model, that point right there might be the big one. The optimal reset price is a markup over expected future marginal cost. Now, when prices aren't sticky, right, when prices are fully flexible, omega is equal to 0. When omega equals 0, right, the probability that a firm can't change its price next period is 0. So all firms can change their prices in response to any shock at any point in time. Price is a markup over marginal cost conditional on the elasticity of demand, which is this right here. And what we get is a reduction down to the real business cycle model. So when prices aren't sticky in this model, the new Keynesian model reduces down to the real business cycle model. So the real business cycle model is actually a special case of the new Keynesian model. It's what I was talking about a little bit earlier, where I said something kind of close. This is like, we'll get back to it later. This is what I meant. The RBC is a very special case of the new Keynesian model where all prices are flexible. Again, might be something you want to remember, just FYI. So we covered all the optimization stuff. You really need to know the intuition of the stuff here. I wouldn't worry about all the math. It's good to see the math to know, well, what's going on under the hood, but you do not have to replicate that math for this course. So there's no calculus here. Sticky prices are important to remember, and that's the process by which it's governed, and it's also very important. It's what's known as I said, Calvo pricing. right? That omega is a Calvo pricing parameter. It's also good to know that the RBC model is a special case of the new Keynesian model. And you will also need to know that it is sticky prices and monopolistic competition that really separates the model or the new Keynesian model from the RBC model and allows for monetary and fiscal policy intervention to improve the efficiency of some but not all of the equilibria in the model, because there are equilibria that are totally efficient where both welfare theorems are satisfied, right? Say, for example, the case where that omega parameter, the Calvo parameter, is 0. In that case, yeah, cool. We have a perfectly efficient equilibrium, and there's no room for monetary or fiscal policy intervention. Now, so next time, what we're going to do is I'm going to end the lecture here just to keep these lecture videos nice and short. Next time, we're going to discuss the output gap and the role that the monetary authority plays. This is where some of the monetary policy stuff is going to come in. It's going to tie in a lot of what we've learned so far this semester. So be on the lookout for that because it will be coming shortly. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.